Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kiana. I'm a conflict resilience educator and community steward, and I am here to help you build satisfying relationships that can survive conflict. Today, I am going to be responding to a community member's question and talking specifically about taking responsibility for your emotions and practicing accountability. Today's question comes from Angela, and Angela has asked, how do you honor taking responsibility for your emotions and tending to the impact of your actions on other people's emotions? So, thank you so much, Angela, for your question. I'm going to split up my response into 5 sections, and I'm also going to try to kind of base all of my responses on the assumption that what you're talking about is hurting someone's feelings or, someone being upset, and not a situation where there's harm or abuse happening. And I'm just going to do that for like the simplicity of responding to your question. And first, I want to say that I really love the language that you used around honoring something. And so obviously, I went to Google and had to look up what it means to honor something. And Google says that to honor something is to regard with great respect or to fulfill an obligation or keep a agreement. And so initially what comes to mind for me when I think about the honoring, taking responsibility for your emotions, is actually thinking about your personal power and impact. And the reason for that is I feel so often that we tend to lean more into the role of being the victim in any given circumstance. And growing up, we aren't often taught that we are people who have power. And so it's really hard then to own that you have power and that your actions and your behaviors, the things that you say, that these impact people both positively and negatively. And so honestly, the kind of first step that I have for you as far as honoring that responsibility is to acknowledge that you have power and that you are going to impact people. Like that's something that really cannot be avoided. And I want to invite you to really think about in any given situation. So let's say that you've said something and it upset your friend, and your friend is telling you that you've upset them and now you're getting upset. I want you to really consider, what is the power that you have in this situation? How do you want to use that power? Like that in and of itself, I think will take you a very long way, as far as that taking responsibility for your emotions as well as for someone else. Now I want to get into a conversation about responsibility versus accountability. I think that these terms, they're very similar. Accountability includes responsibility, responsibility includes accountability. But what I have personally found really helpful in my thinking around being responsible and then taking accountability is sort of seeing responsibility as a proactive measure and then accountability as a reactive measure. And what I mean by that is, in thinking about responsibility, of sort of taking an assessment of who you're responsible to and what you're responsible to them for, and basing the way that you choose to show up in the world, the way that you talk about things, your behaviors, all of this stuff in consideration of the type of responsibility that you're willing to take for the people around you. And then as conflict inevitably happens, as things tend to do, then we can think about the accountability piece and trying to really figure out like how you can take accountability for what you've done or what you didn't do. And that all again goes back to that responsibility piece. So with responsibility, we might say that I am choosing to be responsible for, calling my friend regularly to check in on them, right? And like making sure that my friend is okay. Now, if I don't do that and my friend gets upset at me because I haven't talked to them in like a year, now we can be in a conversation where I might want to be in a practice of accountability and talking to them to see how we can like mend that tension that has now been created. And so now, Angela, I'm going to address the part of your question that talks about like taking responsibility for your emotions. So one of the tools that I've started to use recently and that I really enjoy is using or referencing a feelings wheel, which I have pictured up on screen right now, and then doing some compassionate journaling using that feelings wheel. And so whenever I'm feeling particularly activated by something, I have like the feelings wheel saved in my phone. I'll pull that up and I'll start with the center of the wheel and trying to identify the sort of feeling that feels most aligned with how I'm presently feeling. And then I'll start to move outward toward the exterior of the wheel to get a little bit more specific about the feeling itself. And then the compassionate journaling piece is that we don't want to find ourselves sitting in like self pity and like wallowing in that. And so the compassionate journaling is you might start to reflect on this emotion that you're having of saying, you know, of course I'm feeling scared. It makes sense because I'm afraid my friend won't want to talk to me anymore. And I can show up in this conversation to figure out how we can better stay in contact with each other or something like that, right? And we really do want to focus on that and piece because that's the part that's going to move us away from the self pity and wallowing and really starting to think about the solution or thinking about the reality of the situation and like what can actually be done. Or some other methods that you might want to engage in to do this, like taking responsibility for your emotions thing, is also really just engaging, I think, in any kind of practice that's going to help you get in touch with your emotions with more regularity. So I talked about the compassionate like feelings journaling that I like to do, but some other tools or resources that you might lean on are therapy. You might do other types of journaling. I also like to do meditative walking. I know that like seated meditation and mindfulness is really helpful for some people. And the reason you want to be proactive in engaging in these kind of practices is because it's going to help you build the skill set of actually being able to identify your feelings at any given time. What we don't want to have happen is if someone comes to you and they're saying like, you know, hey Angela, like you really upset me because you said XYZ, is that you don't want to have a big emotional response to flood you and activate you. And now because you're so wrapped up in your feelings that feel overwhelming or confusing, that now you're unable to hear the person who's trying to like invite you in and let you know, what you've done or said to like upset them, right? And in that moment, you can have a much quicker sort of like timeline, I guess, for when the emotion happens to being able to actually name the emotion. And then you can move on from there. It just makes it so that your feelings don't take up as much space and as much time. And you're able to really work through those things because now you're able to name it, right? Next, I want to address the part of your question that is about tending to your impact on other people's emotions. And I don't have too much to say about this except for other people's emotions are going to be unpredictable and we can't control how other people are going to feel based on something that we say or do. And what I mean by that, I'll give you an example. Last weekend, I was at my partner's family reunion and we were at a table with her family and we're like joking, blah, blah. And I said something that afterwards, like in retrospect, I was like, oh wow, like that was probably a little rude. Like that felt a little rude. And I had been ruminating on it all evening and feeling so bad about it. And the next morning, I went to my girlfriend and I apologized to her. I was like, you know, kind of referenced the situation. I was like, that felt like it could have been rude. Like, I'm sorry, da da da. And to my surprise, my partner was like, oh, I didn't even really think about it like that. Like, it didn't bother me at all. But what she did tell me is that there was something earlier in the day that I was doing that did bother her. And to me, I was like, I didn't think that that was a big deal. But now here's my partner telling me that it was a concern to her, right? And so going, you know, just in that situation, the part that I thought that she was going to be upset about didn't impact her. But the thing that I didn't think was a big deal was a big deal to her. So we can't control how other people are going to feel in response to us. What we can do is build our capacity to be accountable to our impact with others. And so now we can really talk about how to actually be accountable to the impact that we have on others. When I think about accountability, well, first I kind of want to say, like, I'm going to go through some sort of steps for being accountable, but that I want you to really use your intuition when trying to be accountable and like practice accountability, because if you were to show up in a conversation with your friend and it seems like you're like reading from a script or you're trying to follow specific steps, you're going to seem robotic, it's going to seem inauthentic, and it'll probably cause more tension in the situation. But here are just some general things for you to keep in mind. So, first, I want you to just acknowledge the fact that you've impacted someone. And this doesn't have to be like a spoken in conversation with your friend, like, I'm sorry that I impacted you, right? But even just for yourself in that moment of like, oh, this is coming to my awareness that I've hurt someone's feelings, like they're not feeling great right now. Just really sit with that. And then we can bring yourself into a process or into the conversation of listening for understanding and speaking to be understood. And what I mean by that is when the other person is talking to you, when they're trying to express the impact that you've had on them, I want you to really engage in those active listening skills. And so this is like, putting your phone down, making sure that they have your full attention, engaging in the conversation. Sometimes that looks like affirming or responding to what they're saying to you, right? And then also speaking to be understood. Sometimes, upset can happen over misunderstandings, and you are also a part of this, right? And so you can share your perspective as well, not sharing your perspective as a means of discrediting something that they've said, but sharing your perspective just to create a deeper understanding about the situation itself. And after you have listened and you really feel like you understand what the other person is trying to tell you about the impact that you've had on them, this is where we get into the apology. And there's a really great resource that you can find online by Mia Mingus. And I think it's just called like How to Give an Apology. And you want to give your apology specific to the thing that that person has told you has upset them. So, had I not been listening to my girlfriend at this family reunion, I might apologize for saying something rude because that's what I thought I needed to apologize for. But there was something else that needed the apology, right? And so that apology in that moment, she was like, I don't need that, right? And then there's also, I want you to participate in the conversation, right? And in trying to move you and this other person or people toward repair. And what I mean by that is that sometimes when we think that we have hurt someone, we really take a step back and we're like, you are the person now who has to tell me what went wrong. You are the person now who has to tell me what repair looks like. And I want you to feel confident and comfortable in being able to really show up for that process. And this is part of what being accountable is like the willingness to actually show up and participate in the repair and in the healing. Then we're getting into negotiation. And, after you've done your active listening and you're understanding the situation, and there's probably a moment in time where you're going to want to ask that person like what they want or need from you going forward. This is especially the case in a situation where there has been like harm or abuse happening, or harm that has been happening. And you want to ask them like what would help you, right? And you have sort of three choices. You can do nothing with what they've told you. That is a choice that you have. You can do everything that they have asked of you, right? And then what I'm more of a fan of is negotiation. So sometimes someone might make a request of you that you really can't follow through on, and that is unfortunate and it does suck, but that's the reality of the situation. I'm trying to think of an example. So if what someone is asking of you is like, I would want for you to pick me up every day and take me to work at 7 a.m., right? But you have to be at work at 6 a.m. Like, you can't do that, And so now we have to actually negotiate around what is it that you are actually capable of doing and what that person like wants or needs from you. And the reason I also want us to get into the negotiation as well is that or asking what people might want or need from you is sometimes we stop at the apology part. And so for some folks and for some situations, an apology is enough. And for other people in other situations, an apology is not enough. I know for me, I don't actually care too much about an apology. Like, I like to see action or hear a plan, or like hearing someone reflecting on how they have received what I've said to them. And then we want to move into the follow through. So based on whatever you and this other person or people have come to agree as far as what repair, healing, correction, whatever looks like, you actually have to follow through on that thing. That is like the key part of the accountability process, and actually taking that responsibility both for yourself and then your impact on someone else. So that's really all the like insight and guidance that I have for you in regard to your question, Angela. Thank you again so much for submitting that. I want to take a moment just to recap what I've gone over, and I'm going to reference my phone for my notes. But first is to recognize that you have power. Like, this exists outside of the specific situation where like some tension or conflict might be happening. But just right now, as you're watching this video, say to yourself, I have power and I can impact people both negatively and positively, right? Like, the more you own that, the easier I think all of this becomes. Next is being proactive and getting in touch with your feelings with more frequency. So the more that you're able to reflect on your feelings, understand where they're coming from, the things that activate you, the responses that you have to certain emotions as they come up, all of that is incredibly helpful information that the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And when you are in a situation where there's conflict happening, the easier it sort of becomes to like have the feelings that you're having in the room, but to not have them take over the experience, right? Next, I want you to think about what it is that you're responsible for and like who you're responsible to. And really, what does that mean for you? How does that shape how you want to show up in the world and the way that you want to communicate with people, the way that you want to behave? Like, how can you really embody the like values and beliefs that you have as far as the type of responsibility that you want to take? And then there is just choosing to be accountable. So as things are happening, I want you to really make it a part of your orientation toward life that you are someone who is willing to practice accountability even when it feels hard, that you are someone who is willing to have people, tell you that they've upset you, tell you that you've done something wrong, and that you won't let that conversation stop you and sever the relationship, but that you can actually show up for the repair and for the healing. And then there's the like actual conversational process. So I want you to really think about how you can best communicate your experience of the situation to like be understood. I want you to actively listen so that you can understand the other person. I want you to learn how to give a good apology and then also just get into a practice of really being able to sit in the conflict and like listen to someone and trying to move toward repair with more frequency and regularity as well. So that's everything that I really have for you. I don't think that conflict or tension or like hurting someone, like these aren't things that can be avoided, but we can be accountable, right? And we can be really mindful about the way that we're choosing to show up in our relationships so that when tension and upset happens, that it can be resolved or addressed without causing further like tension and harm. I hope that this video was helpful for you, Angela. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me in email. But that's it. Until next time.